All right, so here we are, the faithful conclusion to the Sam Raimi trilogy. For those new to the channel, I am the innocent villain, and this is my Road to No Way Home series where I've decided to take it upon myself to go back on a little trip through memory lane and rewatch all of the live action Spider Man movies leading up to and including the new Spider Man No Way Home, which I am personally highly looking forward to. And yeah, right now, it's time to get to the conclusion of the fantastic Sam Raimi trilogy. Now, little background story. When I first saw Spider Man 3 in theaters as a kid, I didn't really like it. I couldn't really place why. I felt like it was just too much at the time, and I just didn't really like the portrayal of Eddie Brock and Venom, so I just didn't really like the movie. I couldn't really pinpoint it. That was it. I just felt like it was too much, and then I didn't like Venom, which when I was younger, I had an issue with that when like characters weren't adapted in a good way or the way I expected them to be. I didn't really like it all too much. I've kind of moved past that as I got older, and I can understand like the inner little quirks. I was trying to say idiosyncrasies, but as you can see, that didn't really work out too well. Of the characters and their adaptation and where they're going for in the movie. But back then, that didn't work. I mean, this is 2007, so I was like 8. So 8-year-old Cameron didn't have the thought process to accept what was going on there, and also I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. I didn't know what was happening with like Sam Raimi and Avi Arad and what was going on about putting Venom in the movie and so on and so forth. So you know, with the context now, as I'm older, I'm able to appreciate the movie more than I did because I did enjoy this movie more than I did when I was younger. It definitely has its flaws. It's got too much going on. There are too many villains and characters in the movie to be handled properly because Sam Raimi, from the previous two Spider-Man movies, likes to take his time and flesh out the characters so you understand what's going on with them. But now in this third one, you got Mary Jane, you got Harry, you got Peter, you got Sandman, you got Venom. You have 5 characters that need to be fleshed out as opposed to like the 3 or 4, because in the previous movies it was Peter, and then you had the antagonist, and then you had Mary Jane, and then you had the supporting cast of Harry and Aunt May. But in this movie, that isn't the case. Peter is a main character, MJ is a main character, Venom, Eddie Brock, Sandman, and Harry are all main characters. The only one who's a supporting character in this movie now is Aunt May. She's not really in the movie all too often, but all of them are now main characters, and that just doesn't fit with the way Sam Raimi makes his Spider-Man movies. He takes the time with a small cast of characters, fleshes them out, makes you feel compelled to see what they go through on screen, and then executes impactful moments. That's why the first two Spider-Man movies are so successful, because they had the time to do what Sam Raimi wanted them to do. But this movie didn't have that, because you can tell that there was too much going on within like the first 5 minutes of the movie. In the beginning of the movie, you get introduced to Harry as Hobgoblin. You get introduced to the symbiote latching onto Peter's bike, and you get introduced to Sandman. All of that happens within like the first 10 or 15 minutes of this movie. It's ridiculous. And also, if you are new and you happen to not have seen Spider-Man 3, I'm sorry for not bringing this up, 4 minutes ago, but this is a spoiler-filled review of Spider-Man 3, as are all of the reviews in my Road to No Way Home series. But I feel like if anyone would happen to see this, they probably are a fan of Spider-Man and probably have seen Spider-Man 3 at some point in time in their life. So hopefully I didn't, ruin someone's experience of the movie so far. But anyway, I digress. Yet there's just so much going on right at the start. It's like, oh, okay, cool. You get to see Peter. He's happy. He sees MJ on stage, and then he sees Harry, and Harry's pissed at him. And then shortly after that, you see Sandman escape from prison, and then the symbiote latches onto Peter's bike, and then Harry juices with the Goblin serum, and it's like, oh, give me a minute here, please. Like, it's just so much happens, but then also it moves too slow. And I say too slow because of how fast some of the scenes are, is that there are scenes in the movie where Sam Raimi gets to execute his formula and things slow down. But then you have other scenes that are hyper fast because they're trying to get everything into the movie so that you can understand everything that's going on. But the problem with that is now you have this disjointed movie where you have the Sam Raimi scenes that are like, okay, these are the slow paced scenes that give a lot of heart and emotion to the characters that we all know and care about, and then you have these super fast scenes that are like, we need to get the knowledge to the characters so the people who are watching the movie understand everything that's going on. It's just too much. It's just way too much. Like Eddie Brock, eh, you don't really know much about Eddie Brock's character. You get the idea from the scenes that he's in that he has a huge ego and that he is delusional. He has a massive ego, he's arrogant, and he's delusional. Because everything that Eddie says that is his isn't his, which you can see that by the end of the movie when Eddie becomes Venom and he wants to kill Peter and Spider Man. He is like, you stole my girlfriend, you stole my job, you ruined my life. And technically, that's true. Peter did reveal something to J. Jonah Jameson to get Eddie fired. However, it's not that simple. Eddie destroyed his own life. Eddie framed Spider Man for a crime he didn't commit and turned in the photo to the Daily Bugle in order to get a job. Him and Gwen Stacy were never in a real relationship because it's shown earlier in the movie when Gwen tells him that they only went out for one cup of coffee. They didn't go out on like a real date because the way Eddie talks about her is like they're in a serious relationship, but they're not. So Eddie sabotaged his own life and he's just projecting it to Peter. Like he's so egotistical and delusional that he literally prays to God for Peter to be murdered right before he gets attached to the symbiote and becomes Venom. And uh, that's something that they don't really explain very well. They don't explain the symbiote. Like it's just this thing that latches onto you and amplifies your negative emotions. That's it. They don't go into greater detail. For example, most people don't know symbiotes are attracted to negative emotion, which is shown visually, but you don't really get that if you don't know it from the comics. Is that when the symbiote latches onto Peter's bike, it doesn't attach to him or MJ because at the beginning of the movie, Peter is super happy. He loves his life. Everything's going well for him. But then the symbiote, while it's in Peter's room, it's just lurking around in there. It doesn't attach to him for days. It only attaches to Peter after he is pissed off at the fact that he finds out that his uncle was killed by Flint Marko, the Sandman. And then when he's dwelling in his anger and self pity, that's when the symbiote latches onto him because it wanted to be attached to his negative emotions. That's something that isn't addressed in the movie. It's something that I noticed because I was aware of it, but it's not something that was able to be conveyed to the audience. And also, there are plot convenient things. Now, I thought when I started rewatching it is that Peter gives a piece of the symbiote to Dr. Connors to examine throughout the movie. And I remembered, at least I was wrong about it, but I remembered I was like, oh, okay, he gave it to Doc Connors because Doc Connors is going to figure out that it's weak to sound, and that's how Peter's going to end up getting it off. But no, Peter just coincidentally goes to the church bell tower and hits himself against the bell and the sound waves help him rip off the symbiote, which it's very plot convenient, which I'd be able to forgive it if the movie wasn't such a mess already, kind of like how this review is right now. So let me try and focus up a little bit on specific aspects. So I'll go character to character for a bit to get everything fleshed out. Peter, for starters, Peter's life is great in this movie. The first two Spider-Man movies, his life is a wreck. Everything's going wrong for him. But in this movie, he's the valedictorian at his college. He is still working for J. Jonah Jameson, so things are going well there. He's planning to marry Mary Jane, and everyone in New York loves Spider-Man. So and Harry, there's something I'll touch on later, gets amnesia and forgets that he hates Spider-Man and Peter. So they become best friends again. So everything in Peter's life is perfect at the moment. And to be honest, his life doesn't really get that much worse. I mean, not through fault of his own or that he's aware of. Everything that happens that's negative in his life happens as a result of him attaching to the symbiote later on. Because the worst thing that happens to Peter in this movie is he finds out that Flint Marko, the Sandman, is the one who killed Uncle Ben and that he's free and out on the loose. So, as I mentioned, when Peter gets upset, he attaches to the symbiote and then he attempts to kill Flint Marko, which doesn't go well because he survives, but he tries to kill him and he thinks he killed him. And he becomes more aggressive now that he does attach to the symbiote. And, he hurts Mary Jane both emotionally and physically. And then this part worked out for him. He gets Eddie Brock fired from his job at the Daily Bugle, but he ends up getting the staff job that Peter always wanted. And granted, Eddie ended up becoming Venom as a result of Peter's vile reaction to Eddie doing what he did, but honestly, I can't even be mad at Peter. Like, he was aggressive in that scene where he got Eddie fired, but Peter didn't do anything wrong. Eddie photoshopped an image that Peter took years ago and then made it appear that Spider-Man was stealing in his new black suit to give J. Jonah Jameson the photo that he wanted. Everything Eddie did is I think it's perjury. So it's a crime. He shouldn't do that. Like, I want to feel bad and say what Peter did was wrong, but aside from being slightly aggressive, he wasn't wrong. There's nothing wrong that he did. And of course, Peter with the black suit gives us the iconic scene, the scene where he's getting down in the street, and it's just so funny because Peter is he's that guy that everybody knows that thinks he's so cool, but everyone thinks he's a dork, but he just doesn't see it. Everyone thinks he's a loser, except him. It's just the funniest thing, because you see everyone's reaction as Peter's walking down the street, just jamming out, just dancing, and every woman that walks by him is just like, what the hell? What is wrong with that guy? It's just great. I love it. It's so funny. I remember I hated it when I was 8 years old when I first saw it. I was like, what is this? This is so stupid. But no, it's a great scene. 8-year-old me can go shut up because that is a masterclass scene. It's so cheesy. It's so funny. I love it to death. Wrapping up Peter's character development in the movie, he makes up with Mary Jane, he makes up with Harry, and everything kind of works out for him in the end. Peter's life is still good. Next up, I'll go with Mary Jane, because she was the character I had the most problems with in this movie, at least from a writing standpoint. Is that in the first two movies, I think Mary Jane is written pretty well. I'm not like the biggest Mary Jane Kirsten Dunst fan in this series. Like, she works well enough. That's fine. But in this movie, her character is written really bad. She's a terrible person in this movie. Sure, later on, she gets valid reasons for being upset. I will admit that. But at the beginning of the movie, she's just jealous at Peter for being happy. That's ridiculous. That is the most toxic thing I've ever heard of. Like, Peter is the love of your life, and you are jealous that his life is going well because she gets a bad review from the Broadway play that she's in at the beginning of the movie. And then she's upset about it, and Peter tries to cheer her up. He tries to, relate to her by saying, hey, I got bad article headlines and everyone hated me when I started off as Spider-Man, but as time went on, people learned to love me and they understood how things went. He was using his own personal experience as an example to make her feel better about what happened, and her reaction is, this isn't about you, it's about me. And it's just like, he wasn't just telling you this story because he just felt like gloating. He was using it as an analogy to make you feel better about the current situation that you were in. And then Peter has to run off to go stop a crime, and he's still trying to be happy. He's like, no, go get him, Tiger. And she just stares at him in disdain, like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, screw you too, Mary Jane. Like, she was just very bitter and jealous to Peter. And that's the thing. That's another thing. She never told Peter she got fired. She never does that. Peter finds out through Harry later on in the movie when Harry is trying to harm him emotionally before killing him, she doesn't like have a conversation with him about like how her life is falling apart and how she's upset because his life isn't falling apart anymore, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. But she does gain validity to her anger later on as the movie progresses, because Peter kisses Gwen Stacy when he is given the key to the city, which was a dumb move for Peter. I don't know what made him think that would have been cool. But that scene is really funny because when Peter is about to kiss Gwen Stacy, everybody's like, "Yeah, Spider-Man, kiss her," and then there's one kid in the crowd who's like, "No, Spider-Man, don't do it." It's hilarious. I love it a lot. But he does that, and then from there on, I think that justifies Mary Jane being upset. She's upset partially because Peter cheated on her with that kiss. And then as the movie progresses, when Peter gets attached to the symbiote, he becomes more violent and toxic towards her. She tries to comfort him when she finds out that Flint Marko is still out on the loose, and Peter's just, aggressive and is just like, "You know what? No, I don't want to talk to you. Just get out." And then, when he actually hits her later in the movie after going on a date with Gwen Stacy just to make her jealous, like, from the latter half of the movie, she's justified in being upset. But that first half, there's no reason. She should not have been upset with Peter for being jealous that he's happy for the first time in his life. This is ridiculous. I did not like that part of her character. It was really annoying to watch her go through because you're supposed to feel bad for her, but I didn't in the slightest bit. But, you know, funny enough, her life doesn't really get much better. She gets a waitress job, which is what she had in Spider-Man 1 after she graduated high school, and she doesn't get back on Broadway by the end of the movie. She just makes up with Peter, which it did lead to a very beautiful scene at the end of the movie that I will talk about later. Next, Harry. Harry, very simple. It's just a continuation of his storyline from the first two Spider-Man movies. His relationship with his father has damaged him psychologically, and he's taking it out on Peter and Mary Jane. That's just it. It just continues with that, and in this, he becomes the Hobgoblin, and he tries to kill Peter, which led to a very cool fight scene at the beginning of the movie with Peter and Harry fighting, and Peter didn't really want to hurt Harry because it's his best friend, but they add in a different element because if Peter truly tried to fight Harry, he'd probably win. So Peter is carrying the engagement ring that his Aunt May gave him like a couple minutes ago to give to Mary Jane. So during the fight, Peter's struggling to try and keep the ring without losing it as things are going on, which I thought was pretty cool. The CG's a little dated for that fight, but outside of that, it still looks good, which is surprising. That was like the one scene where the CG was like really dated, at least for me. The other scenes of the movie that use CG, like every scene with the Sandman, looks really good. Like it still holds up today, which I thought was really nice. But for the most part, it's just that first scene was the most noticeable part. But yeah, Harry's story is simple. He starts off wanting to kill Peter. During their fight, he hits his head and he gets a concussion and amnesia. So it's a little plot convenient that Harry only forgets the fact that he hates Peter and that he believes Spider-Man killed his father. It's but he knows like other things. It's just convenient. And then halfway through the movie, he remembers everything, and he forces Mary Jane to break Peter's heart, and then he tells Peter that he's dating Mary Jane to hurt him even more, and then Peter gets pissed off and puts on the black suit, and they go to fight, and then Peter tries to kill Harry by throwing a goblin bomb at his face, which doesn't kill him. It's good. It just kind of like scars half of his face. So, he survived. That's good at the very least. But that kind of really, Harry's story doesn't really go that much. He's in the movie a lot, but it's not that complex. He gets amnesia. He loses his amnesia. He tries to kill Peter again. It fails. And then his butler tells him something that he probably should have told him years ago. Like, this is the most ludicrous part about Harry's character arc, is that Harry has a butler that has been a minor character throughout the entire Spider-Man franchise. He just shows up every so often, and he's like, "Ah, yeah, by the way, Harry, when Spider-Man dropped off your dad the night that he died, I examined his wounds, and he had stab wounds from his glider, which means he probably ended up killing himself in his fight with Spider-Man." Which, why did you wait so long? Like, what? That's the equivalent of someone waiting until they see a tornado 5 inches from their house before they're like, maybe we should move. Why did you wait so long to tell him that? You should have told him that immediately. But, it's just plot convenience. So, moving on to the two, but that more or less wraps up Harry's character arc. After he learns that information, he forgives Peter. He helps Peter fight Venom and Sandman to save Mary Jane at the end of the movie, and then he dies and he accepts Peter as his brother and he forgives him. It was a really emotional and sad scene. And yada yada yada. You've seen the movie. Now to the two villains that I really like. Sandman is a really compelling villain. I really wish he was just the main villain of the entire movie, because his whole relationship with his daughter, about the fact that he's a criminal, he's not a, as he says, he's not a bad guy. He's just someone with bad luck. His daughter's sick. He doesn't have a lot of money, so he became a thief in order to save her. And then he turned into the Sandman. But even once he turned into Sandman, his conviction to get the money to save his daughter is what kept him around. The scene where he becomes the Sandman after like that whatever weird collider or whatever, like to merge his body with sand, that's a really beautiful scene. He's like fighting to reconstruct his body, and he sees his daughter's pendant, and he's like reaching out and grabbing it, and like he like forces himself through sheer willpower to turn back to normal and control his powers. It's awesome. I love that scene. And his relationship with Uncle Ben, seeing that he killed Uncle Ben by accident and Uncle Ben tried to help him die, was just beautiful. I love it. I love the Sandman. Flint Marko is a fantastic villain. I really wish that Venom wasn't forcibly crammed into this movie, because seeing Peter deal, because if it was just Sandman and Hobgoblin, this movie would have been so fantastic, because they parallel each other. Harry would have hated Peter because he believed that Peter killed his father, and that's driving his life down a downward spiral. And Peter would have hated Sandman and wanted to stop him because he wants to stop the man that killed his Uncle Ben. Their two lives would have paralleled each other. And if Harry still would have died, if that was the plan, if Harry was going to die at the end of Spider-Man 3 regardless, then that would show you could have Harry not give up his vendetta to kill Spider-Man until the very end, and Peter forgives Sandman, which is why he would survive and Harry wouldn't. It would be really good. Unfortunately, that's not what we got. We still get that lesson by the end of the movie with the last character, Venom, aka Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Eddie Brock is just the schlocky jerk parallel to Peter Parker the entire movie, and then he sabotages his own life. And yes, as I mentioned, Peter does destroy it with an aggressive attitude, but it was nothing that Eddie didn't do to himself. He gets attached to the symbiote by sheer coincidence, and then he teams up with Sandman to try and kill Mary Jane and Peter, which there's an issue. I'm trying to. It's just weird. Like, he knows, I feel like, too much. I know that the symbiote knows all of Peter's memories, so when it bonds with Eddie, he gains all of that knowledge, but he, like, says lines of dialogue that, right, he knew that Flint was stealing money for his daughter, when that's not, I don't think Flint ever mentioned that to Peter until the end of the movie, after the final battle. So there's no reason that Eddie as Venom should have known that Flint was a thief because his daughter needed help. It didn't make any sense to me. That's what was bothering me. But outside of that, it's just a nitpick. I can move past that. But the final battle, now this is the cool part. Eddie Brock, his character, he doesn't change, he doesn't evolve. He stays a dickhead, and then that self-destructive attitude leads to him getting blown up with the symbiote. So he ends up dying in the end. The final fight, though, is awesome. Every fight in every Spider-Man movie ends with them trying to save Mary Jane from the supervillains. It's it's a cheesy thing, but whatever. You gotta save the damsel in distress, the one that the hero loves. But the final battle, though, is awesome. It's very tense, it's thrilling. I love that the citizens are all there outside the construction site and they cheer when Spidey shows up. I like that J. Jonah Jameson gets railroaded for a camera that he bought from a child because he always does that to everyone else. It's hilarious. But the fight itself, it's very tense, it's very brutal. Peter is losing. He's getting beaten to death until Harry shows up to help him, and their combo attacks and everything are just great. And the best part of that fight to me was when Peter took down Venom. Is that Peter remember after Harry dies, well, after Harry gets stabbed and is dying, Peter remembers that sound is the way that he can beat the symbiote. So then he starts like throwing all these bars into the ground and hitting them with different metal pipes so that it'll create a resonance of sound that hurts the symbiote, and then he rips Eddie from the symbiote, and then you just see this giant goop venom monster trying to attach itself to somebody, and then Peter takes a goblin bomb, hurls it in, then Eddie runs up and explodes with it, trying to reattach himself to the symbiote. It's great. I love it. I love that scene. Fantastic fight. Fantastic moment. Really do love it. And it shows how, you need to forgive, and that's what happens in that last scene. Peter forgives Sandman after Harry dies. He has a conversation. No, right before Harry dies, he has a conversation with Sandman. He forgives him for Uncle Ben's death, and Sandman leaves, which I thought was nice. Uh, Wrapping up, this movie did end in a surprising way. Is that every Spider-Man 1 and 2 ended with Peter swinging through the city in this bombastic, heroic way, but this movie ends more personal. He hugs Mary Jane after they reconvene and they make up, and that's how the movie ends. It's weird because Sam Raimi did intend to make a Spider-Man 4, but this movie ends in a very concrete and somber way, as if like he somehow knew this was going to be the last one, which I think is kind of weird given the fact that he was going to make a fourth Spider-Man. But nevertheless, Spider-Man 3 does have flaws, but at the end of the day, it's still a fun superhero movie. It still has a lot of heart. It still has really solid action, and yeah, I still love it. It's better than I remembered. So, folks, that'll be the end of Sam Raimi's trilogy. Next week, I will be covering the Amazing Spider-Man 1, which I have words to say about that movie. But remember, folks, you are innocent until proven villainous. Hit the like button and right thumbnail by my friend Curie Tuber. Check him out, and I will catch you on the next one.